We only have 3 weeks left in the regular season, so it's pretty easy to say, looking back at it, that this was the year of the running back. Like, looking at our tier 1 as it stands, we have Barkley, CMC, HN, Henry, Kamara, Kyron, Bijan, Mixon, all as running backs that are absolute locked and loaded bell cows that you have to start every single week regardless of the matchup. Looking at Saquon Barkley, this is a running back that has had 4 games with over 30 fantasy points this season. Looking at CMC, he's back to his prime self. Obviously, the points weren't here against Seattle, but if you look at the underlying usage, he played every single snap. You see the 24 touches. I mean, you had the 20 opportunities the week prior as well. Going over to Devon Achane, the receiving usage remains there. You get another 4 receptions, 32 receiving yards this past week. Also getting the usage inside the red zone. Derrick Henry is a running back that is averaging almost a touchdown and a half per game at this moment. Derrick Henry has had 0 total games with fewer than 10 fantasy points. Alvin Kamara obviously kind of gets vultured from Taysom Hill over and over and over again this past week. But Kamara at the same time, if you just look at his receiving statistics, he would still be a viable flex play just as a receiver, not even counting what you're getting as a rusher. Going over to Kyron Williams, Kyron definitely falling down. Maybe you can make an argument that with Kyron Williams, the addition of both Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua at the same time has really lowered the rushing rate when the Rams get inside the 5 to 10 yard line, where we actually have not seen a rushing touchdown from Kyron Williams since week 7. Whereas if you were looking at the first 6 games that he played, you actually had a total of 8 touchdowns. And over the past 4 weeks, since we've had the wide receivers healthy, we have seen a total of only 1 receiving. So this is a concern, and this will be something to continue to look for going to the future. But he is consistently seeing 90+% of the snaps here in this Rams backfield. It's a very strong offense. And honestly, touchdowns are a little bit volatile in nature. So I'm still going to give Kyron the benefit of the doubt. Going over to Bijan Robinson, very disappointing performance against Denver. But still, while this may have been Bijan's worst game of his season, it still isn't under 10 fantasy points. The man gives you an incredibly high floor. It was a really tough matchup where Kirk Cousins in this offense just kind of imploded. That shouldn't be the case going into the future. And then looking at Joe Mixon, I mean, with Mixon, pretty much every single game that he's fully healthy, you are getting 25 plus opportunities. I am recording this before the Monday night game. So full transparency, if Mixon comes out here and he tears an ACL, yeah, you probably go ahead. You probably move him down these rankings. I'll be keeping these rankings up to date every single day on flockfantasy.com. And of course, if you wanted to go out there and say, oh, Mixon's about to go nuclear against the Dallas Cowboys this week, you can actually take the higher than 104.5 total yards on Underdog Fantasy. You can find the link to Underdog in the description or comment section. If you use promo code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you would be getting a free CJ Stroud pick, more than less than half a total yard for that Monday night game. And you're going to be getting a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night. Just make sure you go through the link in the description or the comment section and use code FLOCK. Now, moving over to our next option, we are going to be looking at Jahmyr Gibbs and Breece Hall. With Gibbs, the only reason I'm not going to have him in tier 1 is you do still have David Montgomery with a massive role. Montgomery is going to have a ton of rushing touchdowns. But I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, the worst game you've had this season is 12 fantasy points. We've seen, a game with over 30. We've seen Gibbs so far be the RB5 in total points scored. He's already through his bye week as well. It's the best offense in the NFL. Going over and looking at Breece Hall, the receiving usage is massive. He's coming off the 31-point performance. In reality, the top 10 running backs here are elite players in fantasy football. Like, if we were to go through and we were to make just straight up flex rankings, the top 11 slots in them would probably have one going to Jamar Chase and the other 10 being these running backs. I mean, It's the year of the running back. I think we're going to look back and really have to switch up as a community how we are drafting these teams. Because if you can bank on these running backs, especially as their age pushes 28, 29, and still expect them to be elite workhorse backs, I mean, maybe we're back to a point in fantasy football where you just have so many more viable running backs than you do wide receivers. Now, going over to our next tier, we are going to be led off with Chase Brown. Now, with Brown, I was interested to see if Khalil Herbert was going to get a little more involved in this game against the Chargers now that he's had some time here in Cincinnati. And nope, that did not happen at all. Chase Brown gets absolutely everything yet again. If you look at over the past 3 weeks for Chase Brown, you've seen 32, 24, and 29 opportunities in what is one of the best offenses in the NFL. You look at over the past 3 weeks here, Chase Brown sitting with 23 targets in the past 3 weeks. The man's sitting with 19 receptions over the past 3 weeks since you've had the Zach Moss injury. Locked and loaded RB1 rest of season. Frustrating that you have to deal with the bye week in week 12, but it is what it is. Kenneth Walker already through the bye. Obviously, with Walker, he gets there in a tough matchup against the Niners with the rushing touchdown. The receiving usage isn't exactly there. It's not one of those games where you get 50-plus dropbacks from Geno Smith. Super consistent option, of course, but you're not seeing the same receiving involvement that you're going to get with Chase Brown. I'm going over to James Cook. James Cook will play one fewer game than Chase Brown rest of season here, which maybe you push him down just a bit. But obviously, he has the red zone role. He has a receiving role in what is one of the best offenses in the league. If you just go through and look at the touchdowns that you've had with James Cook, the man is printing, averaging about a touchdown a game so far this season. And it doesn't look like it's going to change with how good this Buffalo Bills offense is. Going over to Jonathan Taylor. Taylor gets literally every single touch out of his backfield. I mean, we can go over the past month, and this man is averaging over 20 opportunities a game. And honestly, you can look at him averaging over 20 opportunities a game pretty much all season now while he's been healthy. Now, the issue, of course, with this is you kind of get a sense of what you maybe have to expect this past week, where you actually see Anthony Richardson vulture the rushing touchdowns at the goal line from Jonathan Taylor, while at the same time, the checkdown rate is lower as well because Anthony Richardson can run the ball himself. But clearly, Taylor, a running back that has every single touch out of his backfield, super exciting. David Montgomery, super exciting as well. I mean, where if we're looking at David Montgomery, you're running behind the best offensive line in the league. You're in the best offense in the NFL. Obviously, you have to compete with Jahmyr Gibbs, which in my mind is going to leave you behind Chase Brown, Kenneth Walker, James Cook, and Jonathan Taylor. But ultimately, it may not matter because he is also averaging a touchdown a game so far this season. Again, I want to reiterate, there are just so many great running backs in fantasy football at the moment. Going down to our next tier, I mean, Josh Jacobs is another great running back where you are looking at a 3-down bell cow in a great offense. This past week, we get the 23 opportunities. You get the 23 fantasy points against the Chicago Bears. You have a role as a receiver. The only thing that you could possibly look at from a negative perspective with Jacobs going into the future is potentially Marshawn Lloyd coming in here. Wouldn't take the starting job, of course, but Marshawn Lloyd coming in may take a little bit of involvement as a receiver, as I do personally believe Lloyd is a more talented running back than Emmanuel Wilson. So that will be something to monitor. Going over to James Conner, Trey Benson has been expanding his role, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Cardinals over the past few weeks have just been boat racing teams. I think you were getting some Trey Benson garbage time. Realistically speaking, in the games where they're actually a very close contest here with Arizona, James Conner has been playing the vast majority of them. He has been seeing 20-plus opportunities. I mean, we go through and look at every single week since week 5. The man's had at least 3 targets, anywhere from 3 to 5 targets per game. And if you're looking at James Conner, he has the best fantasy football playoff schedule of any running back in the NFL. Isaiah Pacheco could very easily move up these rankings as we get additional practice reports. If he's going to be good to go in week 12, you would typically say, oh, okay, maybe you want to wait a week. Maybe you want to just make sure that he is 100% before you put him in. But the thing is, you're going to be going up against the Carolina Panthers. And even if Pacheco were to miss this week, you have to keep in mind that he's already gone through his bye week back in week 6. So when we set these rankings from a rest of season perspective, taking into account the Isaiah Pacheco injury, at least in my mind, it should maybe hold a similar amount of weight as a running back that is yet to go through his bye, such as say like Jonathan Taylor, who he's going to miss week 14 regardless of that bye week. So, I mean, you do get the benefit with Pacheco. Obviously, I do want to get additional news before we decide to just 100% move him up. And then looking at J.K. Dobbins, of course, the concern is Gus Edwards coming back. It's going to take a little bit of usage. That definitely did happen. And you actually saw the receiving volume fall for Dobbins as well. You only have 12 opportunities in a game against Cincinnati, but ultimately, it doesn't matter. Dobbins gets there with multiple rushing touchdowns. But again, going into the future, this is probably a spot where you do have to deal with this being a little bit more of a running back by committee. While obviously Dobbins is the most exciting running back here, and this is a phenomenal offense, and this is a team that should be able to run the ball in the majority of the games that they play in the second half. I do think that you have to just be a little hesitant based off the additional usage that you have from some of these other backs. With Aaron Jones, I don't want to sit here and say that this is everything, but it is a little concerning to see the Cam Akers involvement against the Tennessee Titans. You also only have one target out of the backfield for Jones, and the receiving involvement has fallen a considerable amount. I mean, you go back to weeks 2, 3, 4, there you're looking at 6, 6, and 5 targets, whereas since the bye and since the injury, you're looking at 3, 2, 4, 3, 1. So the receiving involvement's fallen down. Akers is starting to see a little more usage in this backfield, and the offense has regressed as well. Looking at DeAndre Swift, Swift's in a bad offense, and Swift's about to have a couple of matchups going up against the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions. Should be super brutal matchups. Obviously, Caleb looked better with the change with offensive coordinator, which is encouraging. But Roshan does have a role at the goal line. And obviously, Roshan has the role on third downs and in the 2-minute drill. Now, our next option will be Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson, I think the offense will be better going to the future. It was a tough matchup going up against Philly this past week. Obviously, Robinson isn't a running back that we can expect to have a receiving role that will be going to Austin Eckler, at least based off what we've seen so far. So Robinson more so is a touchdown or bust running back. The touchdowns have primarily been there so far this season for him, but I don't know if we can put him in the same class, touchdown or bust running back like Derrick Henry. Tyrone Tracy also is a running back that doesn't really have a role as a receiver. I know a lot of people hated us when we called out the Tracy sell high game after the Steelers' monstrous performance with 23 points. Since then, you've had 7 and 15. The issue with Tracy, I still maintain, is the fact that you're in a very bad offense and you don't have the receiving role. Clearly, he is the starting running back. Clearly, he is getting usage on all 3 downs. You're just not getting a ton of targets out of the backfield. And then looking at Chuba Hubbard, I mean, obviously, Chuba Hubbard has been significantly better than where we are ranking him. Chuba Hubbard is the running back 6 in total fantasy points scored so far this season, and we are ranking him here at RB24. Now, a big reason for this is if you are looking at Chuba Hubbard with the addition of Jonathan Brooks, again, I want to reiterate for the 1,000th time because we've been saying this every week over the past month. I think maybe it's finally going to come to fruition here. If that Brooks comes in and takes the receiving role in this offense, and this turns into a running back by committee and what projects to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL, while Chuba Hubbard has been an elite fantasy running back based off volume, if some of those high-value opportunities go away with the receiving game, while I still think that Hubbard will be a viable running back, instead of him being a weekly running back 1, I think instead he's looking more so like a low-end RB2 for myself. But again, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with that, and you can scream at me how dumb I am in the comment section. I'm going down to our next tier. Tony Pollard, also another one of these running backs that's in a garbage offense. I think Pollard would actually be lower for me if it wasn't for the fact that Tajee Spears just actually enters the concussion protocol. So if Spears misses any time here, Pollard is going to get a massive uptick in the volume, very similar to what we saw earlier this year, right? You look at over the past 2 weeks where Spears has actually played, there Pollard's at 13 opportunities both weeks. You look at the 3 weeks prior, every week Pollard had over 80% of the snaps. every week he was averaging, about 25 opportunities a game. So with no Spears, he's a 3-down workhorse in a garbage offense. With Spears in, he's in a committee in a garbage offense. Ramondre Stevenson is getting a ton of usage. Over the past month, you are looking at him averaging about 20 opportunities a game, while at the same time, you actually do have things trending in the right direction here with Drake May under center. In games where Spears will be good to go, I'm definitely going to have Ramondre ahead of Pollard. The only reason we're putting Pollard where he's at right now is because that Spears injury again. I'm going over to what we have with Najee Harris. Najee Harris I also have in the Flock League. It is encouraging to see the 23 opportunities this week yet again. Obviously, it wasn't a great matchup, but we go through and look at over the past 5 or so games that you've had from Najee. You've had 23, 21, 23, 22, and 16 opportunities. So the opportunities have been there. Obviously, the issue is you're not going to get the big plays from Najee Harris. Not only are you not going to get the big plays, but also Warren has had a considerable amount of usage as a receiver instead. So do want to be maybe a little bit hesitant on that front. And then looking at what we have with Rashad White, White's absolutely crushed this over the past month. Where, if you're looking at Rashad White, he's closing in on about 17, 18 points per game here. But also, over the past 4 weeks for Rashad White, the man has had 5 touchdowns. Just for me, I think that this touchdown rate is very unsustainable if you're actually looking at the raw opportunity that he's had, where you've had 5 touchdowns over the past 4 weeks. However, you've actually only had 29 total carries. If we're looking at his total targets, you're hovering around 22. So I think the touchdown rate comes down for Rashad White, and Bucky Irving continues to have a decent workload. Rico Dowdle should be in 3-down running back in just one of the worst offenses in the league. So I think he falls in this tier, right? I think you can make an argument that Dowdle looks very similar to a player like Tony Pollard at this point. Dropping down to our next tier, Nick Chubb gets the double-digit carries yet again, but yet again, nothing as a receiver. And yet again, you don't really have any juice here since coming back from this injury. So you're a touchdown or bust option in an offense where we don't expect there to be a ton of rushing touchdowns. Jerome Ford has the receiving role. Not super excited. Honestly, I think we can maybe move Bucky Irving ahead of Nick Chubb here. I think maybe the only reason I put Chubb ahead initially with the instant reaction is going, oh, Nick Chubb's a starter where Bucky Irving is the second fiddle. But honestly, it doesn't matter. Bucky has the receiving usage, and it's an offense that's going to provide more points to the running back position. So honestly, if you check the rankings on the site, I am going to move Bucky Irving up ahead of Nick Chubb. Travis Etienne will be the next option. Maybe we should move Etienne a little bit higher than this if you think Lawrence is going to come back. But Etienne has had 0 games with 15 fantasy points this season. Over the past 3 weeks, you've had 5, 5.5, and 6.5. If Lawrence isn't here, it's the worst offense in the league. So, it's impossible to get him in. Javonte trending in the right direction. Obviously, Javonte gets there this past week with the rushing touchdown and the receiving usage. I would love to come out here and say Javonte's fully back. But we did have the estimated reports. I think maybe it's a little hard to judge exactly what the usage will be for the running backs in this backfield based off the fact that this was just a full-blown blowout. Now, going down to our next tier, these are running backs that have kind of ambiguous roles that are probably just premium handcuffs at the end of the day. Jonathan Brooks, I do expect to come in. I don't expect Brooks to be startable in fantasy. I think more likely than not, Brooks has a receiving role. He eats into the upside of Chuba Hubbard. But obviously, again, I'm not super excited about committee back in a bad offense. However, if Hubbard were to go down, Brooks absolutely crushes. Austin Eckler will have a receiving role here in Washington. You see a season-high 9 targets, season-high 89 receiving yards, but ultimately did look very much like an outlier-type performance. In reality, in the games where Brian Robinson's played, the usage has been well down with Eckler. But again, a premium handcuff back if you were to have that injury to Brian Robinson. Eckler crushes. With Kareem Hunt, if Pacheco were to miss this week, he's a must-start running back against Carolina Panthers. But very similar to what we said with Jordan Mason, the second that Pacheco gets back in, you are going to just be viewing Kareem Hunt as a premium handcuff back. And then looking at a lot of the handcuffs that we have here in the final tier, all these guys are about the same. You just want to go ahead. You want to take your shot at which one of them. I don't view any of them as startable options outside of if the running back ahead of them were to get injured. And if that were to happen, then all of a sudden they crush. You're looking at Charbonnet, Algier, Jordan Mason, Estime. Estime maybe has a little more upside based off what this coaching staff has said. Jalen Warren, Trey Benson, Braylon Allen, Ray Davis, and Roschon Johnson. But again, I really do appreciate you. I really hope that I was able to help you out in some way with this. And of course, if you want to say, Mason, you're way too low on Joe Mixon, he's going to crush tonight, you can go take the higher than 104 total yards on Underdog Fantasy. I'll leave that link to Underdog in the description and comment section. Promo code FLOCK, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to get a free CJ Stroud pick, more than less than half a total yard for the game tonight. And on top of that, you're going to be getting a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night as well. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you and really hope I get to see you out in the live stream later today.